Welcome. Thank you for attending this Provost Town Hall today, and a special welcome to the students who are here in person along with President Cauce. I'm Joy Williamson-Lott, and I'm Dean of the University of Washington's Graduate School. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are in the land of the Coast Salish peoples, which touches the shared waters of all the tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. I also acknowledge and honor the tribal nations across Washington state and the many indigenous peoples from across the country who live and work in Seattle and the surrounding areas. The Provost Town Hall is an important tradition here at the University of Washington, and today, Provost Mark Richards will discuss his priorities: access to excellence, diversity, equity, and inclusion, research, teaching and learning, and how we begin the discussion of what kind of university we want to be post-pandemic. Since Mark joined the university a few years ago, and because he is the university's lead budget and academic officer, he has focused on several areas, including making core investments to advance access and excellence throughout the university. This involves supporting graduate education, hiring faculty who advance diversity, and strengthening the research, teaching, and service that anchor our reputation and our impact. Mark is a professor of Earth and Space Sciences in our College of the Environment, and he knows firsthand that the work of all faculty and the success of the university would be impossible without graduate students and the fellowships to support them, without the financial systems, policies, and processes that allow faculty to focus on their scholarship and teaching. I am pleased that he, along with President Cauce and other UW leaders, are embarking on conversations about the University of Washington of the future. Thank you for watching and being here today. Now please help me welcome Provost Mark Richards.
So, thank you so much, Joy, for a very warm and generous introduction. Joy is a distinguished historian of higher education, and when I first got to know her, I had the pleasure of reading her recent and widely acclaimed book, Jim Crow Campus, which describes how Black freedom struggle and anti-Vietnam War movement combined with the faculty and student activism to bring about change in colleges and universities in the South. In a shameless promotion, I brought a copy of Joy's book here. You can order this from Amazon, and I highly recommend it, and I'm hoping to get an autograph from you today, Joy. Excuse me. Whoa. We are very fortunate to have Joy leading the graduate school. Her leadership and scholarship into issues of power and the role of higher education in shaping democracy is inspiring, particularly during this time. Throughout the pandemic, we have heard from scientists, public health experts, healthcare professionals, and others. We've relied on their expertise, their science, their data, their guidance to make decisions every step of the way. Before I begin my remarks today, and as we contemplate where we go from here in this fluid time, we'll hear from another historian who will help us put this pandemic into context. I am very pleased to introduce the Howard and Frances Keller Endowed Professor of History, Margaret O'Mara. Margaret is a historian and a public scholar of 20th century and modern America. She writes and teaches about the connections between the history of technology, innovation, politics, and culture. She is a frequent contributor to the New York Times, and she has written about the pandemic on several occasions. A consummate public scholar, Margaret continues to connect the threads of the pandemic across American history, from World War II to the rise and response of the tech sector, then and now, and to the not so surprising and uniquely American responses and intersections that impact us culturally, economically, and politically to this healthcare crisis. Margaret has important insights into the 1918 flu pandemic that illuminate a period of history that until the past 2 years, was often overlooked and even deliberately forgotten. These insights are invaluable as we think about where we've been and what this time in history means for us on the road ahead as we start to exit the pandemic. In addition to Margaret, her students are in person here today as well. I think the camera is supposed to pan across you, but thank you very much for coming. It's always good to have students in front of you. Through their course, History of the Digital Age, they are learning about the evolution of the American computer hardware and software industries from the 1940s to the present through a political, social, and economic perspective. As Margaret will explain, we can look back in order to look forward. And with knowledge of the past, our future is perhaps not as daunting as it may seem. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Provost Richards. It is an honor to be here with you, with President Kause, with the entire university community. And I'm also thrilled that you welcomed students from my class here. After the town hall is over, they are ready to take all your questions on everything from Sputnik to Dr. Strangelove to Steve Jobs, so fire away. But more seriously, I am so glad that you students are here, undergraduate and graduate, because you and all the students of this university deserve a moment of recognition, acknowledgement. All of us on this planet, pretty much, have experienced hard, confusing, humbling times over the last 2 years. Years of pandemic, years of political rupture, not just in the United States, but around the world. Years of racial reckoning. Our students have experienced all of this, and on top of that, have had a profoundly different college experience than they expected. Personal and physical and economic hardships, missed opportunities, missed fun, missed human connections, sickness, death, grieving. Students are why we are here, and they've sacrificed a lot. And they, more than any of us, should have a say in what comes next. So, what's next? Should we take the fact that Provost Richards invited me, a history professor, to speak today as a sign that the COVID pandemic is history? Sadly, I am sure that was not his intention, as the pandemic is still very much with us. But I suspect I'm here because the provost appreciates what historians like me do. History, as the students in this room well know, is not about memorizing dates and names. It is about broadening understanding of and empathy for people who lived in the past. It is about making sense of broader patterns and trends. It is about looking to the past as a means of understanding the present and preparing for the future. 2 years ago, February 2020, already feels like history, a strangely foreign place whose people have little idea of what is about to hit them. The first mentions of the novel coronavirus in the UW Daily appeared around that time, early February, late January. One of these early articles asked whether Seattle and the state of Washington would be much affected by the virus, then devastating Wuhan, China. Possibly not, various experts told the reporter, though we really didn't know for sure. It might not spread beyond a few cases, though we really didn't know for sure. If it did spread, recovery might be quick, though again, we really didn't know for sure. The most definitive guidance relayed in that early piece was that wearing masks probably wouldn't make much of a difference. That turns out we really didn't know for sure. Historians like to wait until the dust settles before we attempt to make meaning from human events. And it is indeed still too early to render a verdict on the COVID-19 pandemic era, not least because the era is far from over. But there still is a lot to learn from past moments when the world turned upside down. Some of it is alarming. Human beings really don't learn from history all that well. Some of it feels familiar. People in the past, especially Americans in the past, can be just as cranky and obstreperous and argumentative as we seem to be today. And some of it is reassuring, reminding us that there will be one day and after times, even if those times will not be quite the same as life was before. Now, the most obvious historical parallel to now is the era of the influenza pandemic, which tore across the globe in 4 waves of infection and death during 1918 and 1919. As historian Nancy Bristow detailed in a lecture she gave on that pandemic to our history department in the early summer of 2020, the toll was astounding. An estimated 500 million people, or 1/3 of the global population, contracted the flu. Between 50 and 100 million people died. In the United States, 675,000 people lost their lives. Half of those American deaths were people between the ages of 20 and 40. The impact was so severe that the average life expectancy in the United States in 1918 was 12 years lower than it had been in 1917. The world of the COVID-19 pandemic is very different than that of 1918 and 1919. But nonetheless, there are some similar and interesting patterns, echoes. The initial reaction to the influenza pandemic in the United States was optimism. This was the progressive era, after all. The nation had been urbanizing, industrializing, and building all kinds of modern infrastructure, including state and local public health systems to combat disease. Even though we now know that the first cases of the influenza pandemic probably originated in an Army facility in Kansas and then was taken over to Europe with American troops, then that was not clear. The flu's first wave hit parts of the world that were oceans removed from the United States. And some Americans felt, as many of us did a little more than 2 years ago as we watched Wuhan from afar, it's over there. It can't come here. It came here, it did. Ocean liners crossed the Atlantic with ease, just as Boeing 747s cross oceans and hemispheres today. America's leaders initially failed to rise to the challenge. President Woodrow Wilson was consumed with fighting the Great War in Europe and maintaining public support for that war at home. He had little interest in shutting down daily life, nor slowing the factories that were running overtime to build armaments and biplanes, or canceling the massive parades and big public rallies organized to sell government bonds that would finance the fight. He gave no speeches about the flu. He gave no warnings. He willed it to go away. Presidential magical thinking only goes so far. It didn't go away. Wilson became one of many Americans who contracted the flu, in fact, and later, while he recovered, it likely contributed to a massive stroke that he suffered his last months in office and his death not too long after. Without federal direction, states and localities chose different paths and uneven remedies, but some common approaches emerged. Public life closed down, schools closed, so did stores, workplaces. Public celebrations were curtailed. There was no trick-or-treating on Halloween. The downtown streets of Seattle, empty. The UW campus, empty. When people came back, they had to wear masks. Yeah, to avoid infection, people kept their distance. They wore masks very close to the technology that we are wearing on our faces today. 6-layer muslin cloth masks over the nose and mouth. It's meant to cover your nose. They were saying that in 1918 and 1919 too. Not everyone liked this new normal. Anti-mask leagues emerged in American cities. Citizens demonstrated to reopen shops, reopen schools, reopen workplaces. Then and now, many people really do not like being told what to do. But there were differences. Americans' feelings about masks and closures didn't map neatly onto partisan affiliation, didn't really map where you would think they would. And the First World War continued to wage this unprecedented global conflict. And once the war was over, the war's immediate aftermath, economic and social, roiled society in ways that further distracted and diverted political energy from the pandemic itself. It's interesting, however, to now reflect on how we might interpret things differently given what we have learned from the past 2 years. Now that we're giving this pandemic of 1918-19 a fuller consideration, events like Seattle's general strike of February 1919, or the escalating anti-Black violence in 1919, 1920, 1921, have been understood as phenomena apart from the pandemic, attributed in part, some of them, to the disruptions of war and revolution, attributed to the continuing anti-Black violence of the Jim Crow South. But now I'm not quite as sure that we need to think about how the pandemic comes into that. The experience of mass illness, mass death, of profound societal disruption, whether it comes from war or pandemic or both, clearly leaves a deep and lasting mark. Pandemics expose pre-existing inequalities. They deepen pre-existing political fissures. They mobilize people to fight for their rights in ways that they had not before. They increase fear of the foreign, whether people or viruses that might cross American borders. There was never a vaccine for that flu. It burned through the world's population for more than a year. Then it became endemic, the seasonal flu we still experience and dutifully get our shots for every year. The world went back to something that seemed like normal. Workers took off their masks and went back to the office. Schools reopened. UW classrooms filled with unmasked students. The bleachers at Husky games were again crowded with fans. Americans threw themselves headlong into the roaring 20s. They'd survived and they were going to make the most of it. But the fractures that coursed through American society remained, and they got wider. Anti-immigrant sentiment rose. Sweeping immigration restrictions were passed by Congress, Senate passing the Immigration Act of 1924 by 94-6. The Ku Klux Klan reached the apex of its membership with chapters flourishing in all 50 states. Anti-Black violence escalated. Jim Crow ruled in the South. Progressive reform slowed. More radical activists were silenced, jailed, deported. Memorials rose to World War I soon after its end. The acknowledgement of its collective suffering, the recognition of it, was one reason that isolationism became the prevailing mood of American politics through the 1920s and the 1930s. The costs of war, of foreign war, were too high. America turned inward. But when it came to the influenza pandemic, leaders and communities did much less to mourn the great losses suffered by so many people. The flu left a legacy of, or at least an awareness of, the need for public health infrastructure, and in places like Greater Seattle and the state of Washington, the local and regional health agencies we have here are one enduring legacy of that. But over time, a collective amnesia about the pandemic grew. Today, in the US history textbooks, our students read, and that professors like me write, that pandemic only gets very brief attention. We were so ready to move on that we didn't grieve, we didn't remember, we didn't learn. Perhaps if the influenza pandemic had been more familiar to the average person in 2020, we as a population would have more readily understood and accepted how to curb the disease's spread. We would have more easily seen that individual outcomes depend hugely on the actions we take as a community. We could more clearly see that the inequalities in society would be replicated and exaggerated and made even more deadly at a time of pandemic. History doesn't repeat itself, as Mark Twain allegedly quipped, but sometimes it rhymes. Then there were anti-mask leagues. Now there are truckers blocking border crossings. Then there was a president and other world leaders who looked away from the flu, all of them looking away except the King of Spain, which is why for so long it was called the Spanish flu. Now we have social media-fueled disinformation campaigns that also are altering people's perceptions of reality, changing their minds and making them not see what's right before them. Then and now there is skepticism about what experts tell us, especially when it comes to moments like this one, when scientists had to learn about the COVID-19 virus as it was raging through the global population. It is extraordinary how much scientists learned, how much they did, how much death was prevented by their discoveries, how they developed vaccines in record time. Where would we be now without science? After the apex of crisis, but before the very end, there is a middle place that societies occupy. Not quite normal, not quite the new normal. We are in our own middle place now. It still isn't over. We still take precautions we didn't take before. We still use Zoom as a verb. It is normal for now, but it is not the end of anything. But there will be an end. We will come out the other side. We will not be the same. And we must mourn what we have lost properly. The experiences, the people, the social cohesion, the things we thought we had that were more fragile than we believed. We need to care for one another properly. We need to take care of all of us as a group as we move from the middle to the end. So, as much as I look at the big picture, how we, the United States, the world, will move forward together, I think about this community right here. The small things I have experienced, the remarkable moments I have shared with my students over the last 2 years. Yes, it was incredibly taxing, but to go through this collectively, as families, as friend groups, as departments, as schools, as a university, it bound us together in different ways. We are all changed more than we know. We have lived through history, and we have made history. So time to go and make some more. Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much, Margaret. That was wonderful. And lucky students to be in your class, I can say that. As Margaret shared, while there is familiarity between our present and our past, our world has changed. But what must guide us are the university's mission and our values. As we move forward, we have the opportunity to decide, based on our values, what kind of university we want to be. For my own part, and I think I speak for many in leadership roles, I'm looking forward to a recovery from the extended period of disorientation since the onset of the COVID pandemic to a period of reorientation. As we seek to create a future that confronts the societal inequities that have been so vividly exposed by the pandemic, we can take advantage of the new possibilities for work, teaching, and learning, and even how we and our families live our lives. I want to acknowledge the great losses many have suffered. Lost lives, upended jobs and households, missed weddings, births, and family reunions. We have also seen remarkable resilience. Healthcare providers who put their patients' health ahead of their own. Instructors who switched from in-person instruction to remote and back to in-person so that student learning should continue. Staff who reimagined everything from events to advising in order to best serve our UW students. Researchers who kept advancing their fields of study. These COVID adjustments allowed us to try new things and learn what worked best so we could improve our support for students. For example, the Office of Admissions was able to reach an additional 5,000 prospective undergraduate students by taking recruitment events online. Who knew? New student orientations on all 3 campuses extended their process to include multiple steps and modalities, giving students more time to learn and absorb information. The new structure centered students' need for dedicated time to navigate University of Washington systems, with expert support from the academic advising community. On the Seattle campus, first-year programs saw a 10% increase in students registering for the majority of their courses during advising and orientation, rather than waiting until the beginning of classes. An additional 2,000 parents and family members participated in parent orientation when it moved online. Bothell expanded its peer-to-peer support program to include monthly meetings with peer coaches for each first-year student. Going forward, we have the opportunity to experiment and then to evaluate and assess how we work, teach, and research, and then use that new knowledge to continuously improve the ways in which we support our students, faculty, and staff. In many ways, the use of Zoom and other digital platforms increased access to public scholarship and to the impact that the University of Washington has on our communities and our world. Here are a few examples. The graduate school's 3-minute thesis program, in which graduate students give lightning talks about their research, was live streamed last year, resulting in 676 views, far more than the 136 who attended in person in 2019. In my own research, I've been able to meet more regularly and productively with my international geophysics colleagues, whom I used to encounter mainly at conferences. Indeed, a major international proposal to study the geological and biological coevolution of the Galapagos Islands has resulted from this newly energized collaborative modality. UW faculty, researchers, experts, and healthcare providers have played a leading role throughout the pandemic by contributing their own voices and expertise to educating the public about the pandemic and about many other pressing issues. The graduate school live-streamed its public lecture series, Coexisting with COVID, which featured UW experts discussing their COVID-related research and studies and had more than 76,000 views. Over the past 2 years, our experts were quoted 4,000 times in national and international media discussing their work and not just COVID-related work. Our faculty were also interviewed on everything from climate change to social justice to education. But we must now ask ourselves, how do we use digital tools and the lessons and skills we have learned to increase equity, access, and excellence? How do we continue our mission to be the greatest university as measured by impact that will make for a better society, for accelerated discoveries to improve the health of people everywhere and the health of the planet? Do we need to rethink what we mean by excellence in the academy? What does it take to achieve excellence? We are already doing a lot. Hiring and retaining excellent faculty, evidence-based teaching and learning, innovative research. better facilitation of interdisciplinary and collaborative science across the University of Washington and across the world, commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion of the spectrum of communities in our state and our region. And we need to do better at all of this. Our reputation for excellence in teaching and research, along with our spirit of innovation and collaboration, continues to attract outstanding scholars from across the U.S. and from across the world. This year, we welcomed 145 new tenure-track and teaching-track faculty members whose scholarship, teaching, and service reflect and address the issues of today. They are experts in artificial intelligence, social inequalities, and the impact of microbes on human health. Some are rising stars, while others are seasoned scholars. This year's class of new faculty are, in a word, spectacular. Please indulge me as I mention just a few. Fred Aguayo is a new assistant professor in the College of Built Environments. He researches sustainable and novel cement-based systems for buildings. His research group evaluates deterioration in new and existing cement materials while developing test methods to predict and enhance their durability. Angela Catali is a new assistant professor in the School of Engineering and Technology at UW-Tacoma. Her research focuses on ways to improve highway safety and traffic operations through data, statistics, and machine learning. Mia Bennett is a new assistant geography professor in the College of Arts and Science. Supported by the Data Science Initiative, she researches transportation infrastructure and natural resource development in the Arctic, Russian Far East, and remote corridors of China, and the role of indigenous peoples in driving infrastructure development in the North American Arctic. Sarah Moradian is a new assistant electrical engineering and computer engineering professor in the College of Engineering. Her lab works to improve control and connectivity of trapped ion quantum infrastructure while maintaining high-quality fidelity operation. This work encompasses atomic physics, optics, electronics, and nanofabrication. Princess Imukwede is the new Hunter and Dorothy Simpson Professor and Chair of Bioengineering in the School of Medicine and the College of Engineering. She researches the many signals and receptors that regulate the formation of blood vessels, which aids in the understanding of wound healing, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. David Owens is a new assistant professor in the School of Law. With expertise in law, incarceration, and exoneration, he is launching a civil rights and justice clinic where students will litigate civil rights suits concerning issues such as police violence, wrongful convictions of youth, and other injustices. Xiaodong Nai is a new assistant professor in the School of Business at UW-Bothell. Her area of expertise is consumer cultural psychology, with an emphasis on how cultural identity affects consumer decision-making. It is not an accident, in my opinion, that this exceptional class of new faculty are also the most diverse, by far, that we have ever hired at the University of Washington. As one of my mentors said long ago, diversity and excellence in the world of intellectual achievement are inseparable. This year, 64% of our new tenure-track faculty hires are women, and more than 1/4, or about 27%, are from traditionally underrepresented groups, with most identifying as Latinx and Black. If we are able to sustain and build upon this success, our faculty will grow in time to more closely mirror the diversity of our student body, our state, and our nation. Additional resources are certainly contributing to this success. We designated $3 million in bridge funding last year to support recruitment and retention efforts on the Seattle campus, which aided in the successful hiring of 25 faculty in academic year 2021, whose scholarship advances diversity across 17 of our academic units. Bothell and Tacoma have now designated funds and support for similar efforts this year. and a STEM-focused recruitment initiative administered through the Office of Research assisted with an additional 10 hires in academic year 2021. But the most significant factor in our success has been the collective commitment on the part of the faculty, deans, and others to actively seek broader and deeper applicant pools. The Office for Faculty Advancement, led by Chad Allen, presented 67 anti-bias workshops to faculty hiring committees, as well as 2 anti-bias webinars available to all University of Washington employees. Units also did an excellent job of shifting to virtual platforms and rethinking their hiring processes from the candidate's point of view, measures that encourage larger and more diverse applicant pools. Many faculty told us that what attracted them to the University of Washington, because most of them had many other options, was the excellence of their colleagues and of our students, undergraduates and graduate students alike. They also noted the diversity of our senior leadership, especially for those who are doing work on race and equity, the eagerness of our students to engage with these topics. We will be working on developing ways to more quickly connect these new faculty to our fabulous students. We know it's not enough for us to hire faculty from diverse backgrounds and experiences. We must also support them and ensure that our community is a space where everyone can thrive, particularly in a university where the faculty remain predominantly white. We are making some strides in this direction, though we still have a long way to go. Maintaining our fidelity to our public mission depends upon BIPOC scholars joining, staying, and leading our academic community. Now is the time for us to make these efforts a more explicit, invested, and systematic behavior at the University of Washington. Further and more critically, the Faculty Diversity Initiative Task Force, which I appointed last year, is building upon efforts of generations of BIPOC faculty whose labor toward these ends has often gone unacknowledged and now must be properly centered and recognized. Retention begins with orientation and support, especially in the first few years. We welcome 75 of our newest faculty from across the 3 campuses in autumn with a reception at the Hans Rosling Center for Population Health to start the quarter, and it was a fabulous event. The Faculty Development Program is a new pilot program developed by Presidential Term Professor Alexis Harris to support the success of faculty from underrepresented groups and those who are first-generation college students. The inaugural cohort of this program has 28 faculty from the Seattle and Tacoma campuses, each of whom have been paired with a tenured faculty member in their school or college as a mentor. The program also includes workshops and discussions to provide supportive spaces for community, networking, and professional development. Another way we are welcoming our faculty is through our beloved faculty field tour, which, after a 2-year break because of COVID, is scheduled to return this year. Led by Ed Taylor, this bus tour for new faculty from across the university introduces them to the state of Washington and helps them connect with each other, as well as community and UW leaders. We begin the tour by acknowledging our indigenous heritage at the Burt Museum before we venture across the state in order to deepen our relationship with many partners. Those partners range from farmers in Chelan to colleges and health clinics in the Yakima Valley, industry leaders, and the diverse people of our city of Seattle. And by way of admission, I love going on this tour, not only to meet new faculty, but also to enjoy the spectacular geology and natural environments of our state's eastern regions. In the teaching and learning space, we were reminded that evidence-based teaching and practices should determine how a course is best taught. We also saw the importance of learning communities as an essential part of the student academic experience. Ultimately, the technology that has proven to be critical in providing instructional continuity is a tool that can be used in combination with other elements to create rich learning environments. We also learned how to rely on a variety of modalities to deliver instruction, such as in person, online, and hybrid. How can these modalities best serve our instructional mission going forward? An effort is underway to develop standardized definitions for course modalities and to eventually indicate those consistently in the time schedule. This means students will be able to better plan their courses and their study, to set work schedules and commutes, and take care of family responsibilities. We also need to consider impacts on the student experience. If many or most classes embrace a hybrid model, what does this mean for the residential student experience? How and when do students gather? How do we revitalize the in-person Husky experience that is a crucial part of each UW's students' time here? These questions will be addressed, not just here, but across our country as we plan for the next stage. Some things are essential to accomplish all of this. Here, they start with UW finance reform, which will update the financial systems that support our work, from recording expenses and balancing budgets to managing grants and forecasting our finances. We need to pay increased attention to our infrastructure, including new and renovated laboratories, performing arts spaces, clinical facilities, and improved disability access. We need a welcoming climate where all of us can learn, discover, teach, innovate, and create. We can all do our part to create that climate, starting with our newly introduced Title IX course on how to prevent and respond to sex and gender-based violence and harassment that all University of Washington employees will take between this month and October. You will hear more about this soon from your unit leaders if you have not already. We will begin the discussions about what we learned, what we leverage, how we innovate, who we want to be. How do we deliver student services? How can we retain and create a better work environment for faculty and for staff? How do we respond to the needs of our communities? To these ends, President Kelsey and I will soon start working with the Senate and student leadership to begin a process of reimagining teaching and learning at the University of Washington, leveraging what we have learned, paying attention to the innovations at other institutions, and keeping our mission to educate future generations at the forefront of our efforts. You will hear more about this in the coming months. As Professor O'Mara told us, predicting the course and the end of the pandemic has proven to be elusive. That's a great understatement. Planning for the future post-COVID will be a challenge, but it will be an exciting one. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you to Professor Joy Williamson-Lott for the introduction, to Professor O'Mara for her presentation, and to her students for attending in person, along with President Kelsey and Regent Berisha. And thank you to Victor Balta, Senior Director for Media Relations, for facilitating questions and answers, which I and Professor O'Mara will be happy to address as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Richards. My name is Victor Balta. I'm Senior Director for Media Relations and University Spokesperson. I have the privilege of moderating the Q&A this afternoon. Over the past few weeks, we've been receiving questions from the university community. You can still submit questions now by emailing provost@uw.edu. If we are not able to get to all of the submissions, we will follow up by email. So, Professor Richards, the first question I have for you here is, we have a question from a student named Michael who says the university did a poor job predicting for this wave of COVID and that the late switch to remote instruction increased uncertainty for students. Michael says this caused significant stress to students, and I'm sure many are hoping it never happens again, and asks, what have you learned from this experience?
That's a great question, and thank you. And yes, we do hope we never have this experience again, but we'll see. Because our winter quarter at the University of Washington started very early, that is the 3rd of January on a Monday, and with Omicron literally exploding across the nation at that time, and with many of our students, faculty, and staff having just attended social gatherings, family gatherings, and so forth, and recongregating, we were very concerned not so much about the health risks of directly of transmission, although certainly that was in our mind, but also the logistical problems of what happens if you have a significant fraction of students who have been infected or exposed and simply can't come to class, and creating really a logistical challenge of a high order. So what we decided, and along with many other universities, especially on the West Coast, as far as I know, is that we would give in-person a pause for the beginning few weeks of the winter quarter. This was, we chose to err on the side of safety and caution, and I think it worked out, certainly it was disruptive, anxiety generating, and so forth, but I do think we made the right call given the circumstances in late December when we had to make this call. Fortunately, we are back to largely in person with allowances for COVID-related absences and other challenges in our community. When I talk to students, when I talk to faculty, for the most part, they are thrilled to be back and seeing each other in person.
Thank you. We have a pure mathematics student named Nathan who is thinking a lot about how diversity can positively impact learning in their field of research. Can you discuss how recruiting more people of color to teach in pure mathematics aids in students' understanding?
Well, thank you for that question as well. It is certainly true that diversifying the people on the podium in lecture halls in mathematics as well as other scientific fields is crucial for many reasons. This is a problem I kind of close to my heart. I've worked on diversity, especially among graduate students, postdocs, and faculty in STEM fields for almost 2 decades. This is a really hard problem, and it's particularly hard in mathematics, which has remained rather stubborn in this regard. But it is essential that we have teachers, faculty members, researchers, scientific leaders of color as role models and examples. And of course, it becomes kind of a bootstrap problem. Where do you start? But there's a lot of effort going on in this way. And certainly pure math is no different, except that maybe pure math pure math along with philosophy actually are have proven to be among the most difficult fields to achieve diversity. I can assure you that our math department is making strides. They're committed to this. I know that Natural Sciences Divisional Dean Dan Pollock is completely committed to this as well. I have to brag for a second also that we have a very distinguished professor of mathematics here named Tatiana Toro, who has just been named to an extremely prestigious position as director of the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute, which is among the most distinguished and famous organizations for mathematical research in the world. So we're working at it. We have a ways to go.
Great, thank you. This next question is actually for Professor O'Meara, so I will give you a second to come on up. And the question is, because this pandemic has been so well documented in the news, in social media, in our minds and experiences, do you think that will help us remember this time as we move forward, or will we collectively let the memory fade as with the 1918 flu?
It's a great question. And, we live in an age of information overload, right? We can barely navigate all of the fire hose of information that's coming into us day to day right now. And historians, particularly historians like me who are looking at the late 20th, early 21st century, are alarmed generally about what's the archive going to look like? How do we preserve? How do you make sense when you have such an ocean of information? And how will the historians and the students of the future be able to find patterns in the past? And I think there is one of the things that in Nancy Bristow's address that I referenced in my talk, one of the things she noted at the end was how this, Americans, her take on why Americans moved on from the influenza pandemic was this belief in American exceptionalism, like we're, this either can't happen to us, or it can't happen to us again, or we're different, and I worry that yes, there's an eagerness to move on, close the book. We're tired of this. We're tired of all of this. And you know, and I think there was a hope at the beginning that all of this immense disruption was going to be a catalyst for some pretty profound institutional changes. And, you know, that didn't happen in 1918-19. And it didn't happen to the same extent now. I think there have been profound changes that will, perhaps their full import will become legible later. I hope we remember and change. I think it's gonna, as always, you have to be deliberate about it and think about how does one create the archive? How do you preserve the voices and the different experiences? And that's not gonna be an easy challenge, it's not impossible, but again, having this awareness and of the importance of memory as something that is actually additive and can be hopeful in planning for the future, not just this is a nice to know thing, but this is relevant. I hope certainly we're going to devote longer sections in our history textbooks to the influenza pandemic and I'm embarking on revisions of a textbook in which I get to write about COVID-19, so wish me luck.
Look forward to reading that one. Okay, this one's for Provost Richards, but Professor O'Mara, if you want to stay close by, I think we've got another one for you here soon. I'll ask the question, Provost, while you're coming back up to the lectern there. In 2019, you convened a task force to examine the process and procedures for faculty performance evaluations across the university. What was your motivation? What did the task force recommend? And what are the steps from here?
Also a great question, and there's a little history here that precedes me. I've only been at the University of Washington 3.5 years, but the faculty here have been discussing for at least a decade and probably more issues, especially having to do with the large salary gap between our more senior faculty and peers, and also the inconsistency and sometimes perhaps even unfairness of our evaluation and reward system for faculty. And so back in 2019, which now it seems like forever ago, we did convene a task force that was led in part by deans who are very close to these issues and also by faculty senate leadership to begin a process of at least looking at how we evaluate faculty and how we can improve that process. One of the main outcomes of the recommendations from that group that came in August of 2020, which also seems like a long time ago now, was to try to affect more what we call longitudinal or over several multi-year evaluation of faculty performance and faculty accomplishments. First of all, just because one-year snapshot is often not very effective in a careful evaluation, but secondly, because there are some people in fields who write books, for example, that don't produce regular journal articles every year, or people who work in community engagement and outreach and projects that take time, often get a little bit of short shrift if you're just taking a one-year snapshots of what they do. So there are a number of other recommendations. Those recommendations effectively got, I would say, tabled with the COVID crisis. And then we decided to reboot this effort in the beginning of fall quarter this past year, fall 2021. Again, a combination of a new and somewhat restructured task force and also with Senate leadership, and particularly set up consultations with the Faculty Council for Faculty Affairs, FCFA, and also the Senate Committee on Planning and Budget, SCPB. That project is in full swing. It's in many ways kind of shifting to the Senate in terms of moving forward. I think part of that question had to do with salary, or I can't remember exactly what the question was, but we did an experiment, a kind of a thought experiment at the beginning of this reboot to say, well, could we afford to put in place, say, a 1% in salary pool for faculty to recognize and reward outstanding achievement and accomplishments. And we did that, and for those of you who know the strange kind of way we do business with faculty salaries, we did it in terms of a unit adjustment model as kind of a hypothesis, just to see if we could afford to do this. And so that is kind of where the effort stands now. And again, faculty leadership and particularly Faculty Chair Chris Laws and the chairs of SCPB and FCFA are taking this fully in hand, and we're hoping that we can make some progress both with improving our processes of evaluating faculty as well as hopefully rewarding them for their outstanding work.
Okay, thank you. And this last question for today is for both of you. Professor O'Mara, if you want to go first.
Sure.
What are you most hopeful about as we move forward from here?
Hopeful. Well, one of my favorite things about this campus, there are a lot of things that are beautiful about it, but I love it when the cherry blossoms come out on the quad. And for the last 2 springs, cherry blossom season, the campus has not been open to enjoy the cherry blossoms. And it has been just underscored how our community has had to operate in a very different way. And I work in Smith Hall, which is right on, I get to look at the cherry blossoms, and when it's in high season, you can hear the drumming circles and all the noise and all that, and you think, oh, it's too much noise, I can't work, and I can't wait. I can't wait for the cherry blossoms because they're beautiful, and they're something for our community and for the whole community. And if I go out and I look and I see everyone underneath those trees, admiring them together in reverence of their beauty, I will know that we are in another place, and I'm so excited for that.
Thank you. It's a beautiful image. Provost Richards, same question to you. What are you most hopeful about as we move forward from here?
Well, since Professor O'Mara started off on the cherry blossoms, I'll say something about my own cherry blossoms. My 3 children who are all grown and living in Denver and New Hampshire and West Point, New York, and I'm hoping to see a lot more of them in the next year or so. I'm really looking forward to that. For the university as a whole, I guess the nature of the job of being provost is kind of one, if you can't be an optimist, you can't do this job. But I am hopeful that we have learned a lot. I mean, who would have thought 2 years ago this time that all of our faculty at the University of Washington would, on 2 weeks' notice, master the art of teaching remotely and the educational technology that comes along with that. That came with great struggle and difficulty and sacrifice, and I don't mean to make light of that. But on the other hand, as we come out of this, we have new skill sets for our faculty, for our students, and our staff. And I am absolutely certain that we're going to see nothing short, really, of a kind of a revolution in higher education. It's not clear where it comes out. The hybrid, remote, in-person, student experience, et cetera. All of our institutions are going to be wrestling with this. The last thing I want to say is that what I see coming out of this is perhaps a bit flatter landscape of innovation and decision-making. Particularly, I'm looking at the young people in this audience. We need you to help guide us, all of us, the community, in what this world's going to look like for the next generation of students who come here. Your experiences, your ideas, your wisdom, your criticism, your enthusiasm, your energy, we need to draw on that. And I thank you all for being here, and I am hopeful, and I hope you are too.
Thank you, Provost Richards. Thank you, Professor O'Mara. That's all the time we have for today. If you missed any part of this broadcast, you can watch a replay at uw.edu/provost. Thank you for watching, and go Huskies.